Good afternoon, ladies and gents. It's the 29th of May 2024, and this will be my third video providing you with yet another introduction to a small series of up-and-coming videos. This will be a short video, and again, you're only going to be hearing my voice and no video content, as it's just a short introduction to the following content. We're going to be looking at the threats of possible catastrophic events that could impact the UK economy and the UK's population. Then we'll be looking at counteracting and mitigating those threats. So as previously stated, I'm new to this YouTubing from presenting a channel perspective, as you've probably already gathered. The first video provided you with just an introduction to the channel, and it's worth watching because on that I list all of the topics of conversation and content I'll be covering over the coming weeks and months. Giving you a heads up, just making sure, I do not waste anyone's time. The second video is a fast-track list of events that have occurred over the last sort of 5 months, certainly in relation to the war in the Ukraine and what looks like war preparations across Europe. Although prepping techniques apply to everyone and can be adopted by anyone, some of the prepping advice, tips and help might be more appropriate to certain surroundings. So for example, if you live in a country like the US, then the lay of the land is many times bigger compared to that of the UK. Climate, terrain, critical infrastructure, facilities and services, government legislation, and law enforcement, amongst many other things, will be different and therefore uncomparable. So I'm based here in the UK, so some of my content at times will refer to the United Kingdom, certainly in terms of climate and terrain. So the United Kingdom, as you know, is an island. So threats to us here will be different to threats, let's say, for the residents in Finland. Finland has half its border with Russia, so their threats or their threat levels are really going to be different. And with that, they will be preparing as such. When Russia invaded the Ukraine again in 2022, this was a kind of, what do they call it, a flashbulb event for me, in that I will always remember watching those tanks go across the border with the large white Z sort of painted on them, similar to when the Twin Towers in the US were hit. I remember exactly where I was on that fateful morning and immediately stopped me in my tracks. So although we're sort of sat here in the UK, both events affected, this nation, shall we say. As a result of the towers being struck, the Iraq War was enabled, and with that, the British were involved in conflict. The Russians rolling over Ukraine's border in an event that could see British soldiers back in combat. And only this is going to be sort of, I think this time around, it's going to be on a completely different level. So I could get in my car right now and drive to Kiev in Ukraine, traveling just 1,600 miles in just around about 31 hours. And the problem I'm finding with people I talk to is, firstly, some of them couldn't even point the Ukraine out on a map. So with that, they have no idea sort of how close the Ukraine is to the UK or vice versa. People are under this illusion that it's so far away, the British sort of have nothing to worry about. So I'm finding that people in the UK, of course, know the war is going on, but they're not really interested why it's happening. But the most worrying thing I'm finding amongst the people is that they're not aware of the threats this war sort of presents to us here in the UK. Some think that the war won't spill over into Europe, and even if it does, others still think that even if and when the Russians sort of hit NATO bases, that too won't be a problem for us here in the UK. And that, ladies and gents, is the reason why I decided to kick off this channel. And although the Ukraine war has been sort of going on for just over 10 years since the invasion of Crimea back in 2014, I've been tracking the Ukraine war part 2, shall we call it, for over 800 days now. Every single day, watching videos of soldiers in trenches being blown to pieces, reading the horror stories many of the soldiers and civilians have experienced, listening to the warnings pretty much all European governments are telling their people, watching the movement of military assets across the entire NATO Eastern Alliance, and the list goes on. I would urge you to check out some of the other prepping channels on YouTube for real-time information on what's kind of happening on a daily basis around the world in relation to these conflicts, only if you're interested, of course. And although there are sort of UK prepping channels out there, none of them are covering the actual war and conflicts. So that is another reason why I suppose I'm just kicking off this channel, just to provide the viewers with real-time updates on those threats. Once I have the necessities out of the way, meaning providing viewers to this new channel with overviews and insights to any of those wars and conflicts potentially presenting those threats to me and my family here in the UK, I will then sort of get down to the real-time updates and hope to be able to sort of provide the information out to you as soon as it's received and verified. Don't get me wrong, there will, without a doubt, also be plenty of content on actual prepping, as I endure my own challenges in becoming a UK prepper. You have to sort of firstly be aware of the threats. Then from that, you'll know and identify the vulnerabilities to you and your loved ones. And only then can you start to sort of truly prepare. There's absolutely no point if, for example, you live in Oxford or Huntingdon and only preparing for a long-term power outage if in fact a 100 kiloton ground burst nuke takes out one of the US Air Force bases in your area. If you live in Huntingdon or Oxford, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So with that, let me just give you a quick breakdown of the content I'll be providing you with over this small series of videos. We'll be starting off with the risks to the United Kingdom. That's going to be low, medium and high risk. You have to be aware of the actual risks first and foremost. Then I want to be able to explain to you the different types of attacks that we could be faced with. We'll cover some details on missiles because as an island, threats from missiles is more likely than soldiers, tanks and artillery. Once we're aware of the types of attacks, we need to sort of know what types of targets the enemy's looking at. And with that, you'll be able to know whether you are in a danger area or not. We'll discuss counter-force and counter-value targets and also possible UK targets or other UK targets. Once I've made you aware of some threats, then we'll need to look at the general population, civilization and reactions to those threats and the different scenarios they present. So with those scenarios comes different sets of actions. What should and shouldn't be, what should and shouldn't we be doing, whether that's bugging in, bugging out or whatever else it might be. This would then be a good time to look at prepping or preparedness, because it's okay knowing what actions you're going to take, but will only be possible if you have if you're prepared for them. And I'll be providing a very sort of high level overview of things like shelter, water, food, medication, security and protection. We'll cover some communication and also community. One thing we definitely need to talk about, and it's the one word that seems to send shivers down the spines of everyone, and that is radiation. Unless you understand radiation, you're never going to know how to protect yourself and your loved ones from it, as it's not as bad as everyone makes it out to be. I'm not here to be scaremongering whatsoever, but if the viewers to this channel adopt some common sense and take this information on, what others are portraying as being the end of the world will quickly be dismissed. So unfortunately, it is going to be sort of difficult for me to not mention nuclear war, as I'm sort of discussing war and conflict, and certainly as it's currently unfolding. And as I've already mentioned, if it is a possibility, then it's a threat. And I'm here to highlight those threats to you. Without understanding these threats, you cannot prepare. We've had numerous presidents, prime ministers and other government personnel across most of the countries in Europe mentioning World War III and using the word nuclear publicly and freely over the last 12 months. Whilst on the subject of radiation, we'll cover details on how to seal your home, and I will provide information on personal protection, meaning how you can protect yourself in an NBC environment, as in a nuclear biological chemical environment. We will have to discuss OTC or over-the-counter medications and prescribed meds, with a discussion on different IFACs or individual first aid kits. One of the most important subjects here will also be on hygiene, which will include sanitation, pest control, cleanliness, and personal hygiene. A separate topic in itself will be on energy. The loss of power is a direct threat and a very real threat, and one that we should be taking very seriously. We'll cover power outages, cyber attacks on sort of utility providers or those companies that provide those services such as electricity, gas and water, and the effects of an EMP or an electromagnetic pulse attack in the UK. If we're unfortunate enough to have gone through and experienced the above topics, then we'll probably find ourselves thinking, I don't know, about this final topic in the series, and that's going to be protection and security. Again, depending on which country you live in, will determine what levels of protection that you can take or you can adopt. So, for example, if you live in the US, and depending on which state, you'll find that civilians can own firearms, can carry their own firearms on their person, and in some cases lawfully use them. That in itself, in my eyes, is a high level of protection. But I live here in the UK, so such options are not going to be available. Your protection and that of your family is paramount and a serious subject. So depending on the severity of the attack, the incident and the impact will determine the levels of protection needed. To that end, guys, thank you very much for listening to this quick series introduction, and I'm gonna crack on and start the first one for you.